Due to the holiday season, we fell a bit behind on the editing of our Chapter 1134 review, so rather than risk falling further behind with the release of 1135, we decided to combine the two chapters into one singular discussion.
Yeah, and throughout both chapters, there's an overall sense of peace and reunion, although at the same time, there also seems to be an underlying sense of dread creeping up on the horizon for the future of the inhabitants of Elbaf.
So let's start by examining the one color spread and one cover series before we jump into these two chapters combined together. And we can start with 1134's color spread, with the crew just armed to the teeth with water guns, riding on the back of a gigantic Frankie, very similar to Vega Force 1, and pretty indiscreetly being a tribute to Kazuki Yao, the longtime voice actor for Frankie, who was recently forced to medically retire from the role.
Yeah, Godspeed as you ride off into the super sunset. But moving on to the 1135 cover series, we get another installment of the Yamato cover series, although this time she's not really the focus. Instead, we see Otama actually got a glow up and gets a good hit in on Holden.
Absolutely. Her kick, as she says, "I'm stronger now." I know she's been training with Shinobu, but having a kick that pretty much knocks out Hold'em, similar to what Red Hawk did by Luffy, is insane.
Yeah, and this is especially big for her because, yeah, she was taken captive just as she was before, but this kind of makes it seem that she was able to also free herself without being the damsel that she was during the original Wano arc.
She wants to be part of a pirate's crew, so she's working on it for sure. But let's turn our attention now to the titles for these two chapters. The first of the two being the Owl Library, which is kind of just the setting for most of the chapter, and the second being Camaraderie Cups, where we actually kind of take a step inside of the library more.
Yeah, and also just is where it ends up with us finally coming together at the beginning of their banquet.
And we're going to take this group by group just to tell the narrative in a way that's not just jumping back and forth. We instead wanted to focus on a few of the relevant locations for these chapters, and we'll start with the Walrus Folk School, being a school that Saul himself actually established at King Harold's request about 20 years ago.
Yeah, and this could allude to Loki's father being more of a diplomat than a warrior and being the one who kind of spearheaded this shift in culture, which could also be why he is seen as too weak in his son Loki's eyes and led to his murder.
And we open this chapter with Luffy offering his thanks to Saul for looking after one of his fledglings and doing a unique sort of outdated Yakuza introduction that he most definitely picked up in Wano from Hyogoro.
Yeah, there's a 0% chance that he taught himself that. But after exchanging some pleasantries and compliments, Lilith actually butts in and first says hello, but then very casually blows our minds with the reveal that she has another clone copy of Stella.
Yeah, that Jinbei has just been hauling around for her, no questions asked.
Yeah, we just didn't notice that giant pod with him.
But this isn't just like another satellite, this is an actual clone copy of the Stella body that Lilith has already started the process, and as soon as she gets all the equipment and technology, we're pretty much gonna have Vegapunk back in the story, the same one that actually visited the destruction of Ohara and came to Elbaf, I would believe.
Yeah, so I guess so much for him going into hiding even for that long. But, you know, she first has to set up her equipment and get an entire lab set up before we can actually get to that part. So until then, we get back to the current story where Saul's assistant, I don't know if it's Ange or Angie, but she leads the crew to the front of their school.
And we do see this gorgeous building right alongside the library. Both of these are just extremely pleasant things to look at. Almost every scene shot in this country is beautiful. And it's here that we meet more of the children who are a bit softer than the crew expected, very sensitive to some language, it seems.
Yeah, some of the boys are still a little rowdy, but overall they're not trying to be violent.
Yeah, no, they're much more mild-mannered than I think Usopp and Luffy were expecting. And here they also do meet another one of the giant teachers, being their biology teacher, Ripley. And it seems like every person they meet, they're just a bit more surprised that they're like, these are not the warrior spirit we were expecting. Everyone seems a bit more mild-mannered. And Ripley kind of explains why this is as she repeats the mantra that King Harold had shared with the country to seek trade with other nations, not wage war. And it seems like this vision statement, like you said, was very much the shift from the older generation to the newer generation in terms of how the Giants carry themselves.
Yeah, especially when you compare it to what we saw in Big Mom's flashback, where, you know, they were the greatest warriors on the planet. She wanted to take over the world with them, basically. But even so, he's remembered very fondly by everyone, including the scholars like Ange, which would lead us to believe that he was a good leader still.
And we do hear more opinions in the later chapter from some other warriors, so it seems like this is a pretty consensus feeling that people loved their king.
Yeah, even the ones who were still more warrior-minded and going out into battle, they still respected him enough to uphold his wishes.
And after explaining this amazing culture shift in essentially just a short amount of time for one generation, Ripley does send the kids off to give them a tour of the school, but before they can actually step inside, she pulls Luffy aside because she's just dying to know about his white form that she sees on his bounty poster. And it's here that Luffy pretty much finds out, is told straight up, what exactly that white form kind of means to these people.
Yeah, and I still don't think he fully understands, but it's very slowly getting kind of ingrained into him that, no, this means a lot to us. Like, this goes all the way back to, like, our very core beliefs, even.
Yeah, this is a great warrior of our people. This is somebody we very much look up to. And for that reason, I think Luffy does kind of take it more as a flattering compliment to be like, oh, wow, I'm a great warrior. Thank you so much. So he doesn't quite get it all the way, but they're getting closer to just blatantly telling him, hey, you are the sun god, and you have a lot of responsibility to our people in a sort of way.
Yeah, but at the same time, he still just sees it as his freest form, which gotta love.
Yeah, it's very Luffy. And we do see something that is very Luffy as the only installment in chapter 1135 that we actually see within the school is where Luffy and Usopp are on this swing with some giant children just being launched into the sky, and he's asking for it harder and harder. He wants to be pushed higher. I can only imagine somebody like Zoro's down there just launching them.
Yeah.
But they are all consequently beat up by Nami for scaring the children.
And Usopp's like, I didn't want any part of it.
It is interesting that Nami was looking after giant children on Punk Hazard, and now she's looking after giant children on Elbaf as well.
She loves kids.
She does, and that's very much thanks to Belmare instilling that in her. So it's nice to see it consistent with her character across the story. But that is all we have to cover for the group within the Walrus School. Instead, let's take a trip next door and look at the Owl Library.
Yeah, and some of the crew kind of split off. It was Robin, Chopper, Frankie, Lilith, and Bonnie, I believe. And as soon as we walk in, it's just a massive library filled to the brim with all sorts of giant books as huge as tree branches and roots that stretch across the room alongside these vertical stacks of shelves.
Saul, it seems, was very inspired by the sacrifice of the Scholars of Ohara, and while they can't rebuild the oldest library in the world with the Tree of Knowledge, they can kind of continue their legacy into this other beautiful library space and ensure that it's not lost to the world. But this place is a bit more magical than just holding the spirit of Ohara. As they walk into the building, Saul also demonstrates some real magic.
Yeah, absolutely.
As Robin's book in her hand grows to become larger than her, larger than 10 times her even, and it's truly befitting a giant now as it's grown to this massive size just from walking through the door.
Which makes sense because, you know, they couldn't read the regular size newspaper. It'd be the same way with books. They need a way to be able to actually read these books that were printed on regular size paper.
And because of that, we get an inverse of Broggy telling them, hey, I can't read that, that's way too small, as now Chopper and Bonnie have to crawl across this text to even read a small word.
Yeah.
And I just think that's a really cool reversal to have that on there, but it, like you said, it makes sense. How else would they be able to read these books? And it is revealed in chapter 1135 why this is, because the head librarian, a giant owl by the name of Biblo, is gigantifying every book that comes into his library which Lilith suspects is likely the result of a rear fruit, and very likely meaning the word to rear, like rear a child, where you're helping them grow, but possibly could have the inverse effect of being able to shrink them as well.
Yeah, we don't have the full knowledge, and I mean, she's only guessing based off of what she knows of studying devil fruit, so it could be something similar. We don't know fully, but for sure we know that it has the power to grow. It would seem anything, because she mentions even inanimate objects can be grown.
Yeah, and it's possible it does have the ability to shrink, because when Chopper even asks if there's any medical books, Saul assures him, he's like, yeah, there's some from O'Hara, but we have some here too, but because we wrote those, they can't be shrunk down because they were never gigantified in the first place.
Right, so the O'Hara ones may have that capability.
But before we can delve into this rabbit hole idea and much more, Luffy finally does arrive at the library, and as he's taking in just this beautiful setting, he's immediately interrupted by the same giant child we saw at the bar before, being Colin, charging him with a sword, trying to catch him off guard.
Yeah, already love this kid, favorite little giant, but, I mean, Luffy just brushes it off, breaks the sword in half, and immediately retaliates by going into Gear 3rd Elephant Gun against this small child, which thankfully he's able to dodge.
Oh, I think Luffy was just a bit too on edge. He was like, I was expecting to fight people here.
Well, and I also don't think he was really trying to land it. He was just like, hey.
That's a good show of power. And while Usopp and what I like to call the PC baby giants, because they just get offended at everything,
True,
are taken aback by this behavior, Colin himself seems ecstatic. He's like, oh, you are an emperor. That was dope.
Yeah, he's excited.
And Luffy himself is like, oh, another giant warrior spirit. Finally, I've been waiting to find you guys. And we do learn here that it seems like Colin is very much rebuked by these other children because of his rowdy nature. But in the same way that, like, Luffy and some other of the children that we've seen on the crew really didn't care about the others anyway. They were being themselves. Colin's like, I don't care. You guys are stupid.
Yeah, and I mean, that's also how Luffy was, where they're like, oh, stupid captain. Like, that's just how Colin is too. He's spearheaded. Like, he's always going to get himself into trouble.
But now that Colin has proved Luffy's strength to himself, he does turn his attention to why he actually came here, and that's to deliver the package he was given to his mother. And something I really didn't expect, we learned that Colin's mother is Ripley, but we also get some exposition from Colin that his father is apparently a human pirate who had more of a giant warrior spirit, and it has to be like someone like Scopper Gabon.
Yeah, it's gotta be, which called it.
The Roger Pirates have been kind of strategically placed throughout the Grand Line. Crocus at the start with Reverse Mountain, Rayleigh near Fishman Island, but one of the officers we haven't seen in the new day and age is Scopper Gabon. So why not have him put on Elbaf, and whoever gets there close towards the end, just give them a bit more guidance.
But yeah, I just can't think of anyone else who it could be. And that would also explain who that mysterious figure was when they were first approaching Elbaf that was waiting for them.
Yeah, sitting on the shore, and he's like, you finally made it. Because he's the last Roger pirate that was stationed at this spot. And you also brought up an interesting point that there's been discussion online as well that when copper is perfected and put in its purest form, it's pink, which happens to be what seems to be the unofficial color of Colin's hair.
Yeah, and I mean, the few things that we've seen of Scopper, even in the manga, he seems like a very also hard-headed guy where he's just ready to go to battle at the drop of a hat. And that would explain why Colin's so hot-headed as well.
So it's unofficial at the moment, but it does seem like our suspicions are being confirmed here. And you have to wonder how it's possible somehow physically. But we also did learn about the rear fruit in this chapter. So
make them big. Like.
If it works on living beings, it could very much give a simple explanation as to how that was possible.
Hey man, the things you do for love.
Absolutely. Let's move on. Because after learning about this, the crew decides that they'd like to go in different directions for a while, so we're finally going to move away from this location. Mostly due to Luffy just being so hungry at this point, he can't wait. But there are also who want to read more, like Chopper and Robin. Frankie wants to see more about this atom tree. And Lilith herself wants to get her resident permit so she can start building the technology she needs to bring Stella back to life.
Yeah, which, again, that just shows how amazing Elbaf is. Everyone's got their own thing that they can run off and just be entertained by till the end of the day.
But before they can go anywhere, Gerd decides she needs to outfit the rest of the crew that hadn't been changed by Road into some actual Elbaf attire that she apparently makes for pleasure in her own free time.
Which, again, she has more in common with Road than I think she likes to admit. But at least she's like, hey, that's all it is. I just like to make this. You guys look cute.
And then, once they're all decked out, she ferries them back on their floating ship back to the banquet. But before we can enjoy some of the happier times, we do need to check in on our accursed prince heading to the realm of the dead. And while all of this is taking place in the Sun Realm, down in the underworld, Loki is receiving a call on his cold-resistant Denden Mushi just in order to seemingly kill the time.
Yeah, and at first we don't get the name of the character that he's speaking to, but he asks them if they're still afraid, to which they confirm they've yet to stop trembling. And, I mean, Loki seconds this thought before expressing how frustrating it is that after all this time, and how close they apparently are, they've never actually had a chance to meet face to face.
Then he kind of takes it to another level, because Loki also declares that if he were in his friend's stead, whose name we learn is Mosa, and it's also got a bit of a connotation that implies he might be nobility or royal, so he's at least upper class within this country. But he states he would have slaughtered everybody and decimated the entire area, continuing to not help his case that he's a good guy.
Yeah, he's not.
But at first, while Mosa is apprehensive, after some further goading by Loki, he admits he probably can't be so forgiving of his enemy, and then thanks Loki for his counsel and his kindness, but he really shouldn't have said that
No,
word.
because, yeah, Loki hates that. He snaps at that. Like, that sends him into a rage and tells Mosa never to say that again, and then even goes as far to kind of threaten him that once he's released from his shackles, Mosa's gonna see truly how kind he can be.
But this conversation is the only bit of information we get from the realm of the dead in the both chapters we have, but Loki's presence does seem to be drawing some other outside forces to the island that we see in another one of our locations that we're just gonna call West Castle because the pronunciation is French and we're just gonna say West because we're Americans.
That's what it translates to. It's West.
So, in West Castle, at the end of chapter 1134, while the giants are waiting for the Straw Hats to return for their feast in Western Village, we get a very skinny black bolt of lightning that strikes in the nearby castle, very similar to what we saw when the Gorosei touched down on Egghead. And we do see another similar sigil, but with just two figures standing in the center of a pentagon.
Yeah, and as we see their faces, the first has face bandages very similar to Loki, where it's covering all but one of what we're going to assume is one of her eyes. And we think this just because of the eyelashes and the general style of One Piece. But the other one is a striking image of the one and only red-haired Shanks.
And so, there's been a lot of theories around Shanks either being evil or having an evil twin that was talking with the Gorosei, and that's seen because we don't see the left half of his face.
Which is similar to this instance.
So gives a lot of credence here, but it's almost undeniable at this point that him being able to stop Kaido and then the war, his ability to somehow be in two places at once when he physically shouldn't be able to, and us, like you said, still not seeing the left side of his face, gives a lot of credence to the idea that he might have an evil twin still amongst the Gods Knights.
The only wrench I'll throw in is if he's always had this ability to teleport like this, there's also that.
That's possible. There's still some possibility.
I don't think I lean that way, but it is out there.
Yeah, and not seeing the left half of his face doesn't eliminate Shanks from being him.
It's keeping it kind of in suspense.
But it does give us a reason to wonder why we've only seen that half of his face. So, once they've landed in chapter 1135, we see these two figures continue throughout the castle until they encounter what seem to be two guards and just begin asking questions, not as though they're not the strangers in someone else's house. Like, hey, yeah, so where's Loki? We want to know where Loki is. Don't ask questions who we are. We just need to know about him.
Yeah, and honestly, the guards didn't seem to take it that seriously either. They're just like, oh, why would you want to talk to him? Like, he sucks. He killed our king.
And again, we see that affection for our beloved King Harold. Like we said before, showing affection from the older and the newer generation, that this guy was just really well beloved. But this isn't what they wanted as their answer, and the one female-looking figure begins an odd, like, doo-doo sound before we just hear the word bog. And suddenly this giant just erupts in pain and falls to the ground. And after that demonstration of power, the question now becomes a demand: where is Loki? So they are very much trying to beeline, get there, and get out.
Yeah, and we'll have to see, because we know that this castle is kind of close to where the party's going on, but it's not there. So they could very easily just sneak by everyone completely undetected, and potentially even release Loki before anyone's even the wiser that they're there.
And as these two do try to set off, we'll just have to see if they encounter our crew, who is, like you said, arriving not too far away, finally returning to the Western Village Square. And having returned for the banquet, the giants present can't help but begin to cheer for their heroes, as we're just reminded of them helping Dory and Bragi, them freeing Kashi and Oimo, them helping to not have Harujin be erased from memory and the world. And we can only see that these people are only present because of the Straw Hats' heroics and kindness.
Yeah, they've had effect on all of them. I mean, Oimo and Kashi even. Usopp himself saved them after they had been tricked into basically serving the government.
And I really do love Usopp's internal thoughts here, because it very much seems a step forward in his character arc, where he's talking about we may be small, but they're not looking down on us. It's such a far cry from the boy who cried wolf that we saw in Syrup Village, where nobody respected him. Here, everyone respects him regardless of his size. And I really think that's a step towards him becoming a brave warrior of the sea.
Absolutely. And as the crowd starts to get more and more rowdy, they then raise their cups to cheer to their friend, cementing their bond through the sharing of camaraderie cups, very similar to the brothers' cups Luffy had with Ace and Sabo, as well as the Sons' cups that the Grand Fleet all shared when they swore their allegiance to Luffy.
Those are moments that are so big in the connections Luffy and his crew have that I can only imagine the Giants are going to have to be a part of the End War and the final saga to help them out here.
Definitely.
And as the party continues, we readers are also given a reminder that honestly might have flown over some people's heads because yeah, he looks totally different without his beard and his mustache.
Honestly, how did Luffy recognize him?
Right? But we are told about the history of Stanson also being connected to the crew, as when he was imprisoned with Rayleigh at the auction house, it was the Straw Hats attacking St. Charlos and taking on all of the guards that helped them escape, and it's only because of that he refound his crew. So as they're having this discussion, Luffy's having these happy memories, and then he happens to look up and sees a mountain of a man with a sword in his head.
Yeah, that's quite the sight. That would throw anyone off.
And they're like, that's Ja Rule. That's our village elder, who, again, we saw in Big Mom's flashback. It was the one who nearly executed her after she killed Jorul, his best friend, and is now 408 years old.
I'm pretty sure it also said the oldest living being?
He has to be. I mean, Kureha's old, but she's human. She's only like 140-something.
I'm pretty sure it was the oldest, which...
The oldest one in the world, I believe, was the official title. Yeah. And Luffy can't help but turn his glance up and just be shocked that he's like, hey, you're huge, but there's a sword in your face. And he's like, yeah, my helmet stopped it.
No, it didn't. It's right through.
These giants are fierce. They're tough, but they might not be the most observant people in the world, which really doesn't bode well for what's happening right under their noses in the castle nearby. And wow, what a combo of chapters to end 2024. After being blindsided by an early release, we can say for certain this is now the last chapter of 2024 for One Piece. And while there will be another one next week, we also wanted to say thank you to everyone who's found our channel, tuned in for any of the videos over the past year. We've really committed more to doing this channel over the past year, and it's because we wanted to share our love for this story with so many of you other people who are just as passionate as we are. So thank you for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, leave a comment on what you thought of these chapters, or even just your favorite moment from 2024 of One Piece. And as always, be crew!